Some of the stories making headlines in Central Africa as we speak to Aaron Ngambi, a geopolitical analyst focusing on African affairs. He's also a columnist for The Mail and Guardian. Let's zoom into West Africa, and very good morning to you, Aaron. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you, and good morning to you, and good morning to our listeners this morning.
Thanks for making time. So let's start with former DRC Minister Augustin Matata Ponyo has been sentenced to hard labor on corruption charges. We understand he embezzled some funds, public funds. What were they allocated for, these funds, and what is the amount?
Well, we do understand that the amount that he's been indicted to have misappropriated or embezzled is $245 million. And this was an amount allocated to establish an agricultural piece of land to engage in agricultural activities. So basically, this was supposed to be a government project that would employ over 22,000 employees and be able to feed basically the entire Congo and produce agricultural produces. Unfortunately, this project did not take off, and so it is alleged, and in fact, it's been almost proved that he embezzled this money, and it's been indicted, and he will save 10 years of hard labor in jail.
His lawyer has called this ruling unfair and politically motivated. What are your thoughts around that, and what has been other commentary around this news?
Yeah, I can understand why his lawyer would make that assertion. And the reason for that is because we have seen a systematic pattern in the Tshisekedi administration that most people that have disagreed with him, people from the previous regime, including even the former president, Joseph Kabila, has been harassed in one way or the other. So I think to many people, or to some people, they think that this is a politically motivated case. But on the flip side, this is a case that's now been proven in the courts of law, and the victim in question has been indicted and charged, and in fact found guilty of embezzlement.
So what will this mean then? As you say, the funds were for an agricultural project. There are food shortages in the DRC. What will it mean for the efforts to tackle that issue after this has come out? Will they even be able to gather funding and be credible in terms of their plans to deal with food shortages?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that $245 million is not a small amount of money. Yeah. If the amount of money in question is actually the amount of money that was embezzled, it is almost extremely difficult to replace that kind of funding. But not only that, it also sends a wrong signal to other potential investors who want to come into the agriculture space, to come and invest into agriculture produces so that they can feed the people. And so this is a very delicate issue. It is very difficult to figure out if the government will be able to replace this kind of amount of money and even go on with the project. I think that is yet to be seen. However, I think that it sends a wrong signal and puts the DR Congo into a very bad light in terms of people that would be interested to agriculture or investment ventures in the Congo.
Let's move to Chad now, where former Prime Minister, the opposition leader also, Sukse Masra, has been placed under provincial detention on allegations of inciting hatred in the country. What can you tell us here?
Well, Sukse Masra is an interesting figure. He's also a former Prime Minister. He did contest against the incumbent in their last elections, and he didn't really score much in that election. I think he got about 16 to 18% of the votes, while the incumbent, Idris Deby, scored about 61%. So you can look at the margin. Even though Sukse Masra refused to concede defeat and claimed that there were a lot of irregularities and malpractices during that election, but he's gone on to now be detained, as has been investigated in connection with the violence that took place in the southwest of Chad, where thousands and thousands of people were killed. Initially, people thought that this was an ethnic uprising. It's an ethnic violence between the Fulani headsman and the ethnic group of people that are of that region over land dispute, but it turns out to be that this might be issues that are political rather than tribal or regional. Therefore, the government is investigating Suks and Masra to be connected with armed groups that have risen up to cause this kind of violence and confusion, even though he denies all the charges against him. And also, we do know that these charges are really serious charges. He's been charged with arson. He's been charged with the killings that are going on. He's been charged with arming groups that are rising up against other groups. And basically, that is destabilizing of the country. And with that, those charges carry a life sentence. Therefore, if he's convicted, then Suks and Masra will go in life. And he's relatively young. He's in his 40s, and he's quite an upcoming and promising politician.
This was also nearly a week after he was arrested on suspicion of inciting hatred. It seems to have been moved fast for us to be at this point now. What are your thoughts on that? Was it not so quick?
Yeah, and this is the connection that the government is trying to make between, the charges of hatred and also the uprising that happened a week, days later. So the government is basically making the argument that he is fueling this hatred, and so groups rising up against other groups on tribal and regional basis, and also the allegations that he could be behind finding some of these groups providing arms so that they can kill one another. But the evidence is yet to be established, and for now he's in detention for the foreseeable future.
What are his supporters saying?
Well, his supporters think that this is an effort by government to bury him politically, to send him to a political dustbin, and so that he does not come back. Like I said, he is relatively young. Suks Masra is probably about 41 or early 40s, and he's already been prime minister before, and he's already served in different portfolios in government. And now he's an opposition leader, and a quite promising one. Therefore, some people think that the government is trying to link him to these killings and uprisings that are going on in the southwest part of the country. Therefore, so that they can lynch him and politically disadvantage him and probably get rid of him politically entirely.
Let's go to Rwanda now. They've hosted their first international security conference on Africa. President Paul Kagame saying that peace and security in Africa should not be outsourced. Has this kind of a conference been long overdue, in your thoughts?
Well, those are the words of President Paul Kagame. He thinks that this conference is long overdue. He thinks that this conference pertaining to Africa's security should have been happening and have not happened in a long time. And he is basically talking about how Africa should take responsibility for its own security rather than relying on other countries, especially the foreign countries in the West or the East, to come in and help us with this. I think that there's a lot of people that would agree with those sentiments. I think there's a lot of people that would, on the face value of what Paul Kagame says, would agree with him. But sometimes we have a lot of leaders in Africa that says one thing, but their actions are completely different. I believe that the leaders of Burkina Faso, the leader of Mali, the leader of Western countries that have been taken over by the military junta would agree that it's about time that Africa takes responsibility of its own security and takes care of its own. And also some other African countries who are not military leaders. But I think the message coming from President Paul Kagame is interesting because he himself has been accused of, or his government has been accused of meddling in affairs of other countries that are of a security nature.
Do you think Rwanda is in the best position currently to be hosting such a conference?
Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. In one breath, I think Rwanda has some credibility in terms of regional peace and stability, and that it has, since the genocide, made tremendous progress. And there are a lot of people that would vouch for that. There are a lot of people that would say, because of this historical record and the proven leadership of President Paul Kagame, Rwanda is better proven to be able to lead such a conference. But also, in another breath, there are people that would disagree because of what we see in the Eastern DR Congo and the allegations by the United Nations and other experts that have gone into the Eastern DR Congo that Rwanda is actually funding and providing arms to the M23 rebels to destabilize the DR Congo, even though Rwanda has actually.
So let's talk in terms of the key attendees that were there and those that you feel should have been there if they were not.
Well, I think a few attendees that were there, there was quite a number of African countries that were represented. Some were represented by actual heads of states, others were represented by ministers assigned by the heads of states. But I think that for those who were supposed to have been there, I was hoping that we should have seen people who are key players in this conflict that is going on, people that have been very vocal, people that have tried to intervene in what's been happening in the Eastern DR Congo. Some of those players should have been there, including the SADC region leaders, including the Eastern community leaders, and also any other leaders that feel that this is an important conference and that Rwanda actually deserves to lead this path of talking about security for all African countries.
And then in terms of this conference, do you feel like it's going to actually change the narrative on Africa's role in its own conflict resolutions? I know that's the goal, but can we reach that point?
Yeah, I think that is the attempt by those who attended. That was the attempt by President Paul Kagame to send a message that we ought to actually look internally in Africa if we have any disputes or conflicts or issues, that we ought to actually sit down and dialogue and find a solution rather than going to seek help from outside. You know that most of the conflicts in Africa, not just in the Eastern Congo or any other places, most of the conflicts in Africa, unfortunately, turns out that the powerful nations of this world have vested interests. You find that the United States is perhaps involved indirectly or directly in that conflict. Even in its mediation efforts, you find that perhaps the French government is involved, and so on and so forth. So I think that the tone that's been set from Rwanda is the correct tone. I think that it's achievable, but I think it will take a lot of sincerity on the part of African leaders to really look inwardly and see that they're not hypocritical in any breath when they talk about these issues.
As you speak of us looking inwardly, do you think we are able to share our security priorities by, first of all, looking inwardly, so looking at national interests, but also being able to accommodate regional interests while we do that?
Yeah, I think it's very possible. And I think that both, if you look at, in this case, we're talking about Rwanda and also the allegations of its involvement in Eastern DR Congo. If you look at the kind of work that the Eastern African community countries have done in trying to bring all the parties together, if you look at what SADC has done in trying to bring President Tshisekedi and President Paul Kagame together, and even the M23 leaders to the table, the efforts have been, encouraging. Unfortunately, in almost all cases, these regional blocs have failed to sit the leaders down in that conflict, to be specific. And it was, for me personally, it was disappointing to see that the two leaders, President Paul Kagame and President Tshisekedi, were actually able to go to Qatar and sit down with the leader of Qatar rather than sit down with the African leader. So I think that that's an issue of confidence. Do we have confidence in ourselves and leaders within the region, or do we prefer to have somebody else to mediate these conflicts that we have?
Let's move to Malawi now. They've suspended the IMF program. What can we read into this? They've got serious economic woes. Why this move and why now?
Yeah, Malawi is an interesting case. They have an election coming up actually this year in September, and I think that the regime is panicking. Yes, the International Monetary Fund has suspended its credit facility, extended credit facility to Malawi, and the government of Malawi claims that this was a mutual agreement, that they came together and agreed to suspend this program. But the timing of it itself is rather interesting because this is at a time when Malawi has serious economic issues. We've seen with the protests that have been going around in Blantyre, in Lilongwe, in almost all the big cities, and people are basically rising up against the government because of the levels of poverty, unemployment, among young people. It's just skyrocketing. So it is interesting that the government claims that they're doing this so that they can focus on local issues and dealing with poverty and other things, rather than trying to actualize this extended credit facility from the IMF. I know that the opposition have actually called out government and said that this is not the right time to do that. This is a wrong move. It's a wrong thing to do. But anyway, the government of Malawi has gone ahead and thinks that in an attempt to do that, they'll actually find homegrown solutions or local solutions to the problems that they're facing, rather than looking outwardly to the International Monetary Fund.
Any other stories to look forward to that we can expect to discuss in the next few days in Central Africa?
Well, yeah, there's a lot that is going on in Central Africa. I think that we may see a few things going forward. I'm expecting to see how the situation unfolds in Zambia. As you're aware, the American government, through the ambassador in Lusaka, they were actually suspended all aid worth $50 million in health, citing corruption, and actually accusing the Zambian government of not being serious in terms of dealing with corruption in health, in terms of medicines, and things like that. Also, we are aware that there are a lot of issues to look forward in what's happening in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe seems to be always an interesting place. Seems like something is going on almost every day. We look forward to also hearing a lot about the leadership of Duma Boko in Botswana and how that is making tremendous progress. One thing that I have seen with African leaders is that when they come into office, when they're Rickies, the Greenies, they seem to be the savior of their country and the entire continent. They have a very positive outlook on things. They seem to be doing the right thing, but you give them a little bit of time, you get disappointed. We hope that is not the case in Botswana.
All right, let's leave it there then. Thank you so much again for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be with you again.
Thanks, Aaron. That is Aaron Ngambi, a geopolitical analyst focusing on African affairs. He's also a columnist of for the Mail and Guardian, giving us our stories making headlines in Central Africa on this Thursday. 31 minutes past 6. Let's say good morning to Onel Nzinzi for our news headlines.
SABC News headlines. The African perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa